Hey everybody, I'm Ashleigh Banfield, and this is Drop Dead Serious. When Bryan Kohberger shocked the world by up and pleading guilty to the Idaho student murders, a lot of people felt kind of cheated and still feel cheated. Not only because they wanted to see that stone-faced, cold-blooded monster on the business end of a firing squad, but also because they wanted to know why. Why did he slaughter 4 innocent college kids, whom, as far as we know, he had never even met? Why did he use a hunting knife to butcher them? The truth is, even if Kohberger had gone to trial and been convicted and sentenced to death, we might never have learned his motive for such a despicable and senseless killing. But here's another truth. Secrets come out in all sorts of places, not just in courtrooms. Before he confessed to murdering Maddie, Kaylee, Xana, and Ethan, Bryan Kohberger was a student of murder. He had a master's degree in criminal justice, and he was working on his PhD. So he did years of coursework in forensics and criminal psychology, analyzing the methods and picking apart the writings of killers who came before him. Among those killers, a psychopath named Ashleigh Rodger. In 2014, Ashleigh Rodger killed 6 people and hurt 13 others near the University of California, Santa Barbara, before he killed himself. He stabbed 3 of his victims to death inside his own apartment. Kohberger stabbed his victims, all 4 of them, inside their rented house. Rodger shot 2 women dead outside the Alpha Phi sorority house. Kaylee Gonzalez, one of Bryan Kohberger's victims, was a member of the Alpha Phi sorority at the University of Idaho. In fact, all of Kohberger's victims were part of Greek life, and 2 of them had been at a frat party the night before they were killed. Ashleigh Rodger penned a 137-page manifesto, a portion of which complains about a female acquaintance named Maddie, who was ignoring him. Maddie Mogan was another victim of Kohberger's. And yes, I hear you. I can see connections anywhere if I look hard enough, and you can too. But when it comes to the Idaho murders, there is also the social media account called Pappa Rodger. After the kids were killed in their King Road house, but before Kohberger was arrested, a user named Pappa Rodger popped up in an online discussion. And Pappa Rodger seemed to know things that only the police would know, or maybe only the killer would know, like the possibility that the killer had left his knife sheath behind at the crime scene, which turned out to be absolutely true, and also the linchpin to tracking Bryan Kohberger down. In the days and weeks after the quadruple murder, the user named Pappa Rodger was dissecting the case like someone with inside knowledge. He asked pointed questions, he offered disturbingly accurate theories, and he often answered his own questions himself. Lucky for you, we have screenshots of the Pappa Rodger posts from 2.5 years ago. They're actually really hard to find because many of them have disappeared. And the posts really do take on some new meaning in light of Bryan Kohberger's guilty confessions. But first, I want to mention something about a news site that I just partnered with. It's called Ground News, and it's awesome, especially since these days it's really hard to know who's writing up propaganda and bias and who's just doing straight news. And this happens in true crime reporting too. So like take, for instance, Jeffrey Epstein. The DOJ just made it official. There is no Epstein client list, and I don't know whether that's true or not, but what I do know is that the headlines on this story are all over the place. But Ground News really cuts through all the noise and actually compares how different outlets report the same story. Like I found 12 different versions of how people covered the Epstein DOJ update. And let me just give you some of the examples. Reuters, for instance, goes pretty clinical. This is the headline: DOJ closes Epstein probe without charges, reaffirms suicide finding. The Guardian, though, kind of headlines it straight up: no Epstein client list to be released. But the New York Post, they're really edgy. Case closed without naming powerful clients. So it's like the same headline 3 different ways. And I have to be honest with you, If you go to Ground News, they're going to give you a bias rating. They're going to tell you who owns these news outlets, and you'll really get a feel for who it is you're reading, which is very helpful. And they even give you factuality scores. If you subscribe now, you get 40% off that Vantage plan. It's at groundnews.com/Banfield. And if you can't remember that, just click the link in my description. Okay, back to the Pappa Rodger posts. Pappa Rodger was the username who popped up in the Facebook groups and the chat groups, waxing poetic on the King Road murders, almost like he'd been there. The screenshots we grabbed from 2.5 years ago are eerie when you read them today, especially since Bryan Kohberger has now confessed, and we've had confirmation of certain details in the case. And again, these posts are really hard to find because most of them have been sort of disappeared. So here goes. On December 20th, 2022, Pappa Rodger writes, Ethan didn't live at the crime scene. Very possible the killer didn't know he was there. Thoughts? On December 11th, 2022, Pappa Rodger asks, how long do we think the killer was in the house? And Pappa Rodger answers his own post, 15 minutes. Well, as it turns out, the killer was actually in the house about 15 minutes from 4:05 a.m. until about 4:20 a.m. when his white Elantra was seen speeding out of the neighborhood. So tell me that's not eerie. Pappa Rodger asks and answers, 15 minutes the killer was in the house. And that's exactly right. Pappa Rodger describes a picture on December 2nd, 2022. It says, quote, this is on the high side of the house. They found evidence here. It is likely blood dripping from the killer or killers. Either they fled through this area or were parked there. This being the most strategic entrance point to the house, it shows planning. And wouldn't you know it, during the hearing where Kohberger confessed, the prosecutor read some more facts about the case, and it turns out that is exactly where Bryan Kohberger parked his car and then scrambled down a slight hill into the backyard of this home so that he could gain access through the sliding glass door in the kitchen at the back of the house. Yes, strategic. And yes, planning. It all makes sense. But that was Pappa Rodger. This was Bryan Kohberger. And on December 15th, 2022, Pappa Rodger asked this question. The killer has sexual dysfunction. Thoughts? On December 21, 2022, Pappa Rodger writes this. Regardless of what has been released, I believe that this is a sexually motivated crime. Somebody responds, potential reasons, house full of girls, house full of specific girl or girls, party house, was familiar with layout, location, dark wooded coverage, lack of cameras, distance from his own apartment/car, third floor windows, unobstructed view, lights on at night, perfect for voyeuristic activities. Possible that the house fit a fantasy scenario in the killer's head, reminded him of something from his past. Possible even a vehicle that reminded him of something/someone who had spurned him. And Pappa Rodger responds to that observation with the following word, quote, excellent. Almost like he's a professor talking to a student of crime. And here's the most damning post that leads most people to believe that Pappa Rodger is Bryan Kohberger, when Pappa Rodger writes about the knife sheath. On November 30th, 2022, Pappa Rodger posts, of the evidence released, the murder weapon has been consistent as a large fixed blade knife. This leads me to believe they found the sheath. This evidence was released prior to autopsies. Again, that was written on November 30th, 2022, just over 2 weeks after the murders. But here's the deal. That was not public knowledge, not at that time. And it wasn't made to be public knowledge that a knife sheath had been left behind by the killer until January 5th, more than a month after Pappa Rodger suggested that that's exactly what happened a knife sheath had been left behind. When Kohberger was a criminology student at DeSales University in Pennsylvania, he posted a Reddit survey asking convicted criminals to take an anonymous questionnaire, quote, for a research project. I am not exactly sure if this was a real project since it was posted in June of 2022, a full month after he graduated with his master's in criminology and 3 months after he'd actually purchased a K-bar knife on Amazon. Either way, one of the questions that he asks in the survey is, quote, why did you choose that victim or target over others? And on December 8th, 2022, Pappa Rodger asks the following question. Why did the killer choose that house over all the others in the area? That same day, December 8th, during the height of the search for the white Elantra, Pappa Rodger posts, I feel like the white car isn't relevant. Interesting that Pappa Rodger would say white car and not Elantra. Is that Bryan Kohberger starting to freak out that a white Elantra is on everybody's mind? So maybe I'll get in a discussion group and just poo-poo that and just call it a car, not an Elantra. On December 11th, 2022, Pappa Rodger asks, do we think the killer took anything from the house? And Pappa Rodger answers his own question, quote, I do. I can't tell you if Bryan Kohberger took any trophies. We don't know that. Not now, not yet. But I can say this. When they searched his apartment in Washington, right? They didn't find anything of evidentiary value in that apartment. They found nothing connecting Bryan Kohberger's apartment and him in that apartment to the murders on King Road. So if he did take a trophy, did he take it to Pennsylvania with him? Did he put it in a secure place? Did he put it in a safety deposit box? Did he throw it away when the heat started to be turned up, like people were looking for the white Elantra? Did he get rid of it? And then when Kohberger was arrested on December 30th, 2022, Pappa Rodger posts, suddenly stop. Forever. And by the way, after that arrest, when they searched his parents' home where Bryan Kohberger was separating garbage in the middle of the night using gloves, they didn't seem to find anything that they've told us about that tied him to 1122 King Road or to those 4 killings. Did he take something from 1122? Didn't seem to be at the Pennsylvania home, at least. That's not something we've learned yet, but when the gag order is lifted, maybe we will. So upon the arrest, right? December 30th, we never hear from Pappa Rodger again. Is it a coincidence? Maybe. But maybe it's not a coincidence. Because there's also something that the FBI seized from Kohberger's parents' house in Pennsylvania. The agents described it as a, quote, book with underlining on page 118. And we can't be certain which book the FBI is referring to. The affidavit does not get specific about it. But if it was Elliot Rodger's catalog of sexual grievances, page 118 certainly speaks volumes. It reads in part, I lived in a college town full of young, attractive students who partied and had sex all the time, and I didn't get to experience any of it. None of the beautiful blonde girls showed any interest in having sex with me. Not one girl. And I'm still quoting here, women must be punished for their crimes of rejecting such a magnificent gentleman as myself. 2 of Bryan Kohberger's 3 female victims, Kaylee Gonsalves and Maddie Mogen, were blonde. And the house on King Road was known for its parties. We also know that Kohberger went upstairs to Maddie Mogen's room first, where Kaylee and Maddie were both sleeping. He killed both of them right there in Maddie's bed, before encountering Xana on the way downstairs to the second floor and either following Xana or chasing her to her room, where he killed her and then killed Ethan too, because lo and behold, Ethan was over that night sleeping in that bed. Page 118 of the Ashleigh Rodger book also says this, quote, "It came to a point where I had to set a date for the day of retribution. I originally considered doing it on Halloween of 2013. That is when the entire town erupts into raucous partying. There would be literally thousands of people crowded together who I could kill with ease. And the goal was to kill everyone in Isla Vista, to utterly destroy that wretched town. But then after seeing footage of previous Halloween events on YouTube, I saw that there were too many cops walking around. It would be too risky. One gunshot from a cop will end everything. The day of retribution would have to be on a normal party weekend. So I set it for some time during November of 2013. Bryan Kohberger committed his murders on November 13th, 2022, after a big frat party that night at the Sigma Chi house. As it turns out, Bryan Kohberger studied the manifest of Ashleigh Rodger at length while he was a criminology student at DeSales University in Pennsylvania. And on my NewsNation show, Banfield, I talked to a classmate of Bryan Kohberger's, a classmate who took the same course as Kohberger, with the same professor, Dr. Catherine Ramsland. They studied the crimes and the manifesto of Ashleigh Rodger, and they also shared a biology class together. Here's my conversation with Josh Ferraro.
As a student, he was very astute, very diligent, and he was a pleasure to work with.
So when you say he was a pleasure to work with, was he a pleasure to work with because you're a man? Because all of the reports say if you were female, he wanted nothing to do with you.
Yeah, I could say that would be accurate just because during class and roaming around DeSales University, I never saw him really talk to anybody. In the group project, he communicated with me via text and email, and we worked diligently on this project, him and I together with two others who really didn't do much in the project. But when it was time to communicate, he was easy to communicate and text and email and make sure the project and the portions that needed to be done were done. But in terms of his interactions with other students, the most telling thing I can say is he really kept to himself. I remember vividly many times watching him in the Starbucks in one of the buildings, and he would sit there with his computer and his headphones in and keep to himself almost all the time. In class, he would answer questions from the professor, but you never really saw him engage, interact with really anybody. Even myself in our group, we didn't have many conversations because he would shut down any kind of small talk.
So, Josh, you know, you can remember somebody for no particular reason, and you can remember someone because of something like this, and suddenly you look at your memories through a different prism. When you look back at the man you see on your screen right now, when you look back at your time with him, do you see any red flags? Do you see anything that now stands out, now makes perfect sense?
No, I can't say that I do. I mean, he was like a chameleon. I mean, for everything that's came out, some of the most heinous people look the most normal. And I'm not saying Bryan Kohberger looks normal whatsoever, but he definitely, in my aspect, doesn't raise any red flags up until this point and the past few years. But I did notice, you know, telling things that, like how you kind of said, this prism that I'm looking through in my past, and he really kept to himself. Something interesting, he always wore long sleeves, no matter if it was hot or not. And I just remember making that distinction because that was something odd that I noticed about someone, although it bears no weight and no meaning, and that he kept to himself almost all the time. And he was a commuter student, so he didn't spend much time on campus. He came to class and he left.
If you look back now, do you recognize anything in the patterns of the killings that he has now confessed to? Even though I understand, Josh, we don't have all the details, we have a fairly good idea of what he did to carry out these heinous acts. But do you recognize anything in the patterns of what he did at 1122 King Road as compared to the things that you all were being taught, the things you were learning about other terrible killers?
Yeah, you kind of mentioned it earlier with Elliot Rodgers, and something I'd said in a prior interview with God knows who was that in these classes, we go over many times how in the digital age, these people will try to relive that fantasy. Digital age, physical age, doesn't matter, but they're oftentimes going to go back to that crime scene. And one way to go back to the crime scene is to go to a pseudonym like Pappa Rodgers and enter a community and relive that high. That is something we went over in depth, and kind of, if it does come out ever that he is Pappa Rodgers, would say that's pretty shocking, just because that's very silly to involve yourself back into the crime and leave a digital footprint instead of being physically there. But we also know that he had went back in that morning, so he might have done both.
Do you think, Josh, that Bryan Kohberger is Pappa Rodger, who showed up in those crime discussion groups after the murders?
Until someone else stands up and says that it was them, absolutely. I don't see any reason to say that it wasn't him. The pseudonym Pappa Rodgers in connection with Elliot Rodgers makes a lot of sense, especially if he did idolize him as, the king of the incel community and wanted to do it, even better, or pay homage to his name and what he had done in the past. And I haven't seen anything online or anywhere that says that he isn't, or definitively that he is. So it's all speculative, of course, right now, but it would not surprise me in the slightest if, to relive that high, he entered that community just to feel everything that he felt that night again.
Pretty uncanny, the profile picture and the icon picture in the Pappa Rodger, right? I mean, when I first saw it, I thought, well, that's a dead ringer right there, and what a stupid mistake. But then again, Bryan Kohberger made a lot of stupid mistakes if he thought he was so smart at committing the perfect crime. One last quick question for you, Josh. As a student of criminology, do you think you'll ever reach out to Bryan Kohberger to try to ask him questions or learn more about why he did what he did?
Would I?
Yeah.
No, that's not my place. I mean, you leave that to Dr. Ramsland and the professionals. I run a swim school now. I have nothing to do with criminal justice anymore. I'm very happy where I'm at. Although if given the opportunity to speak to him and just ask him why, I think anybody would take that opportunity. So I guess I would say yes on that. And there better be other people in the room because, I feel for the victims and their families, and what he did, what he admitted to, now we can finally say, is atrocious and awful. And yeah, everybody wants to ask him why, so I can't deny that I would ask him if given the opportunity, but we'll leave that to the professionals.
I said it was one last question. I lied. I have one more, and I'm sorry. I'm going to ask you anyway. Josh, he gave a plea. He confessed. There was no trial. There will be no death penalty. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I wrote a paper about the death penalty in college. I'm for the death penalty, an eye for an eye. He took 4 lives and got to keep his. I think that's the most unjust, unfair thing. And as America, we should be able to speak out about these things and make sure that people like this, get their just desserts. And he definitely is living a cushy life for the rest of his life. I'm a prior corrections officer. Jail is not that hard. You're away from your family. You have tablets. You have TVs. You have activities. You have games. You have people that literally hand you food. He is going to live the rest of his life in infamy. And I think that that's an injustice to all the victims, all their families, no matter how they personally feel, because I know some of the families felt different. I am a proponent for an eye, especially when it's 4.
Josh Ferraro, can't thank you enough for this time. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
I'm Ashleigh Banfield. Thank you so much for watching. I always love that you're part of this community. And just remember, the truth isn't just serious, it's drop dead serious.